There were some huge revelations from the Joe Rogan podcast interview with Elon Musk, and he shared those big revelations. We're going to go over that and some analysis and thoughts, and maybe a little bit of our feelings about it too. I'm here with Dylan Loomis, your host of Electrified. I'm Bradford Ferguson, and let's just get right into it. So the big insight that Elon shared, which should be obvious, but it wasn't to me, is at the time and around when Trump was deplatformed from X, Elon was the biggest user of X and got the most engagement of accounts. He might have been a little smaller than President Obama's account, but he got the most interaction because he's like very interactive on Twitter. And one example of this, there's before they made the Cybertruck, he asked for people, what do you want to see in a pickup truck? And he literally got 26,000 replies as one example. So Elon could sense that something was up with X. And I think that's kind of what started it, but also seeing Trump be deplatformed. What are your thoughts here before we get into more of this?
Yeah, I think that's why it's important for people to at least have the high level takeaways of what the Twitter files really were. I mean, the shortest way I can put it, you literally had our FBI and the CIA in constant communication with the former executives of Twitter, now X, effectively paying them money to censor certain posts, whether it was election misinformation, whether it was about the war in Ukraine, whether it was about COVID. I just can't understand how people think it's okay to have the FBI and the CIA literally in constant communication with their own network channel telling the former executives of Twitter, hey, like, we don't like this post. We think it's disinformation. You need to take it down. You need to deboost it. You need to shadow ban this account. And it was of people like Dan Bongino and Charlie Kirk and Jay Bhattacharya. Like, all of these people had their accounts deboosted, shadow banned. As you said, Trump was literally suspended from the platform. So had that continued and had that played out, that's walking down a path toward North Korea style. Now, obviously, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but that's how it starts, right? If people don't push back and fight back against that censorship, it continues and it grows and their power gets bigger. And it happens on YouTube. It happens on Instagram. Zuckerberg literally admitted to it. And not only that, there's so much there, but I think Elon knew that from a regulatory standpoint, if he didn't push back and actually change the way things were going with the administration, that getting to Mars was going to be much more difficult. And so it wasn't just about free speech, but there's a lot you can really dive into. But yeah, understanding the Twitter files is a big deal.
So Elon's also a billionaire, and I think one thing he feared was losing his voice. When you get into a certain class of wealth, these people buy up magazines and newspapers and radio shows. Like, I think Reid Hoffman Mark Benioff owns Time magazine. So he could sense, potentially losing his voice. So then he decided to buy Twitter. And it was in a time where you had this huge spike in growth stocks, and they surged going into this spike in inflation. The Fed started lowering rates. The war in Ukraine started. And so the value of Twitter came down. They were already beginning to struggle financially. And it became known through various reports that Twitter's value was down by at least a half from where Elon said he would buy it for 44 billion. The left, sensing that this would hurt Elon financially, they essentially decided to force Elon to buy Twitter. And Twitter worked with the Delaware courts to make this happen, where they thought they were causing Elon like a $22 billion or more loss to hurt him in the pocketbook. This actually ended up backfiring. But maybe you could talk a little more about this.
Sure. Yeah, there's even more to the story too, like with the inflated bot numbers. And I think Elon raised some valid points. But in the end, as we saw, Judge Kathleen McCormick, yes, that very one who is involved with Elon's compensation plan, did effectively force Elon to close the deal. And there's just no way she could have predicted how this all would have played out and the role X would have had in the election outcome on Elon's overall influence. Because
But really, the left was pushing her hard to do that.
oh, absolutely.
They
And I
were
think we
excited
saw
about it.
for sure, just like we saw with Elon's compensation plan, there was people cheering for that and it was a huge thing.
Yeah,
Like,
McCormick didn't know where this would head, and it may have had a big impact on the election. Just getting messages out there. There was a lot of fraudulent messages, just the fraudulent stories around, fine people, the hoaxes, the Russia hoax that the mainstream media subjected us to for 3 years. There were other hoaxes and information control around the health crisis that happened and a particular thing escaping from a certain place in China. I don't want to get a little flag at the bottom of our video, Dylan. So you know how
yeah,
YouTube likes to put those flags.
sadly, I do. Yes.
So it was a huge thing that Elon did. And potentially with the negotiation, what could have happened is that Elon may have backed out if it was renegotiated. There was a potential that could happen despite how important he thought it was at the time. He could have backed out. So this really changed the course of history.
That I think it really is an understatement because he absolutely was trying to get out of that. And I think, of course, he knew like what was going on with the censorship and he wanted X to become the digital town hall and he wanted it to be the everything app like they have WeChat in China. So he knew all of that, but I'm not sure he really knew the depths of what was going on until he took over. And I'm not sure he knew how much of a role X would have in the election, given everything that was taking place outside of X, because I think we can all, well, most of us would agree there's a lot of misinformation out there. And it's not even that, it's just there's so much context that's left out from the mainstream media that you can get now on X. And so, yeah, I think Elon knew it was important, but the magnitude of it and just his involvement over the past few weeks with mobilizing people to vote and just talking about common sense principles and how many people he woke up to what was really going on. And you can tell there was a lot of people, again, looking at the popular vote that had just kind of had enough of where the country was headed. And not to get too far into the politics, but there was a lot that was going in the wrong direction and needed to be changed. And the way I see it, it really is just, common sense policies. And there's so much toxic empathy with, the immigration and how we're giving money to this group of people. And it just can't continue. It's not sustainable and it's not fair to the people that do it the right way and that are waiting in line and trying to do it legally.
Yeah, and just a little further on the very fine people hoax, because I think there's some people who still might believe it that are listening right now. Literally within a minute of Trump saying that, he said that he condemns, white nationalists and neo-Nazis. Those words came out of his mouth, and the media just clipped it out and pretended it didn't happen. So you talked earlier about going right to the source. I think it's important. Like if the media is hammering on something, stop and go find it and have a listen to what was really said. And maybe it was that bad, but a lot of time it's not, and the media is putting some kind of spin on it. It could be all channels of media. We all have our own biases. We have a bias for Tesla and Elon Musk and SpaceX.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you can't see how the media is built to get your views, keep your views, and then spin a narrative, then you're really just not paying attention. One example, when JD Vance came onto the scene and the narrative was all about weird, and someone on X clipped together all of the different clips, and it was a 3-minute video where within a couple of days, all of these different mainstream media outlets were calling JD Vance weird. And it was clearly like a targeted effort across all of them to kind of, villainize or paint him as this goofy guy, when if you actually listen to him talk and get to know him on a platform like Rogan, it's like, I mean, the way I see it, he's a pretty normal guy. I think he's actually quite sharp and has a pretty bright future, and weird isn't really the adjective I would use to describe him. So it's like, that's just one microcosm of a lot that was going on.
So I would encourage people to go to the source, whether it's on YouTube or whether it's on X, and see what's been really being said. So we had McCormick force Elon to buy X. You had the whole Twitter files that happened. I think Elon is an incredible, not just an incredible innovator and engineer and person who can assemble great teams and get them passionate and moving in the right direction, but he's just an incredible leader that will do whatever needs to be done. So a lot of what Elon did may have alienated some Tesla customers who don't like free speech, or maybe they think X is misinformation or whatever. These things came at a cost to Elon. And I almost feel like the time this came in when you had an administration that was jailing opponents. So like a dozen of Trump's aides or so were thrown in jail. And a lot of it was for just like not wanting to cooperate with the witch hunt. So like, is non-cooperation really a crime? I know there's some lawyers and prosecutors who think so, but that's definition witch hunt. You had all this censorship that was happening. To stop it at this time, I think there's a lot of synchronicity. I almost feel like it was a miracle that happened. I know you're a faithful person, and that's a loaded word. Elon's agnostic or whatever, and he has his own flaws and things. But what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, how much time do you have? But what I would say is I think there were multiple, right? First, Trump being alive, I think you could classify as a miracle of sorts. The fact that he turned his head at that time and that the shooter missed from that range. And so I think that's pretty incredible. The confluence of factors that led to Elon actually ending up buying X when there was a real chance he didn't, and how that would have changed the future of potentially the election in our country. Now, I'm not sure if it would have flipped it totally, but I definitely think it would have been maybe closer than it ended up being. And it's really just the beginning of, I think, Elon's influence from a political standpoint, being involved with this administration. And when you really just add up all of the pieces to how things could have gone and how they actually ended up going, yeah, it's pretty hard not to see how there's a higher power involved. And of course, most people that watch this probably know I'm a Christian. I'm a God-fearing man. So I believe God is sovereign and always has his hand in everything. And he ultimately chooses, who's in power and who's not. And he allows certain things. But yeah, I just think Elon's role in his impact on humanity will absolutely go down in history books. What I always tell people is like, just take 5 minutes and think about the world without Elon. Tesla wouldn't be Tesla. It might not even exist. SpaceX, the opportunity to go to Mars, not on the table. Neuralink, giving sight to the blind and doing so much for people that have limitations and working toward that. And now again, with free speech, without him, it's just like the world would be a much less exciting place. There'd be a lot less hope. Now, of course, I still believe the ultimate hope is only found in Christ alone and all of that. But just from a worldly perspective, right? A lot less excitement. And so the number of people that demonize him and try to cut him down, I'm just like, is that really how you want to choose to spend your life? Like cutting down the man that's doing the most for humanity, maybe more than anybody ever? It just will never make sense to me. And that's why I have a hard time kind of jiving with that cohort of people, because he's just different. He's a different breed.
And I want to point out to people who maybe somehow miss this on X or on the media. When Trump was shot, I'll do this ear. So like, let's pretend this is a bullet, right? His head was like this, looking at the crowd, but then he turned it to look at this teleprompter, and basically the bullet grazed his ear instead of hitting him in the back of the skull. Like that's a place you do not want to get shot in the back of the head. Like that's not good. And that was like literally a split second that happened. It's almost like a butterfly or something. Yeah, just an amazing confluence of events. Elon being forced to buy X by the judge in Delaware, Elon getting involved in this whole thing with long form media, and just how information spreads easily on X and YouTube is just, it's huge. And yeah, I view Elon as a source of hope as well. I'm incredibly excited. I think we're going to see autonomous taxis proliferate maybe by next summer. I know that's a little aggressive, but that's going to help a lot of people with mobility. A lot of rideshare people use rideshare for their commute. So it's not just when people are on vacation using a Uber and Lyft. So it's going to have the potential to help a lot of working class people. So I've done Uber and Lyft. That's why I know. And also like to potentially have the blind see, to be able to help paralyzed people be able to walk. That might be further out, but there's the potential there with Neuralink.
Yeah, I think they've demonstrated they're on that path. And I mean, now we're talking about biblical miracles, maybe not in the same sense. I just think it's pretty incredible. Honestly, I pray for Elon that he gets saved and comes to actually know the Lord. And he's talked about Jesus and how he believes in his teachings and is a proponent of those. I think any Christians out there, we need to all be praying for him, just for his protection and ultimately for his salvation too, because he's a human and needs Christ for forgiveness of sins just as much as the rest of us.
All right. He is Dylan Loomis 22 on X, also Electrified on YouTube. And thank you for joining us. And I'm going to say bye for now.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.